John Frost looked on the gathered crowd, now 3,000 strong. With heavy heart, his voice rang loud as he sang this loveless song. God is a guide from field, from wave, from plough, from anvil, and from loom. We come our country's rights to save and speak a tyrant faction's doom. We raise the watchword liberty. We will be free. For when the rising tide is turned in every London quarter, Parliament comes crashing down with Robert's Rules of Order. And bobbies took an oath to be our nation's warders, swearing that they would enforce Sir Robert's Rules of Order. Till Newport rose a million friends who rallied each supporter to join this flood of working men against Robert's Rules of Order. For when the rising tide is turned in every London quarter, Parliament comes crashing down with Robert's Rules of Order. Like this, on the steps of Parliament, John Frost stood proud and tall. A hush fell on this great event as he told them one and all, depose the gentry and the crown, depose the House of Lords, or join the Queen in exile by Robert's Rules of Order. So Chartists, Luddites, Communists, recall each faithful martyr who died so you could have your new world Robert's Rules of Order. Say it loud, vote your favor, shout it high. All in favor, you say aye. Favor, aye, favor, aye. A mandate of the people's cry. Favor, aye, favor, aye. Let's hear the opposition side. Like a stubborn donkey's bray. All opposed, you say nay. Opposed, opposed. The motion carries anyway. Currents change and bring to us our dear corrupted warder. In chains subdued and ill-abused, he's left with no supporters. Mobility's will can then proceed by our own rules of order, and we'll all cheer for country's sake when Robert's drawn in quarter. For when the rising tide is turned in every London quarter, Parliament shall be reborn with Robert's Rules of Order.
Hey, that monitor, whoa, hold on 1 second. That monitor keeps going off. I think my monitor, hold on. I think this second monitor is going bad. And without
stand by. We are experiencing technical difficulties.
Yeah, without it, I can't see sound levels or comment. You know, the setup.
Yeah.
It comes up. And then it goes right down. Talk so I can see if our sound levels are even.
Okay, your monitor's name is got a German name now. Fritz.
Yeah. We'll see if it's up now, but we'll see if it stays that. It just went down again. Hold on 1 sec. You can talk while I'm screwing around with this.
I can talk while you're messing around with it. Well, for those who are tuning in, we hope you all had a good holiday, Merry Christmas, or whatever you celebrate, and a Happy New Year. Welcome to the 2025 flip side. And away we go. Expect chaos tomorrow in Washington and in Ottawa, because in a few minutes ago on the news there was a report that the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, also known as Fidel Castro's illegitimate son, is expected to resign. Good riddance.
Really?
Yeah, that came in a few minutes ago.
Oh, I didn't see that. So I unplugged it from the back of my Mac Mini and replugged it back in, and it put it back on. So maybe that's all that needed. Nope, it just went off again. I think I'm going to be buying a new monitor. So anyone who's commenting, we're not going to see your comments. I'm trying to figure out how to get comments onto this main screen. Comments and reactions, even, yeah, because it still thinks I have this other screen. So I'm going to unplug it permanently and then see if I can get, yeah, I have a very crowded primary screen, but at least I'll be able to see comments if there are any. Now, let me put the audio levels on this screen as well. I'm sorry that there's technical difficulties. This is also playing on Pink Flame of Liberty, so everyone, I need to get in front of the mic. Wayne always reminds me of that. Go to Cult of RONR and subscribe, because I don't always put these on Pink Flame. But what we're talking about today is notice. And the reason why I put it on Pink Flame of Liberty as well, besides the fact that I haven't been able to stream all week because holidays and everything, is when you and I say that we are using as a springboard example something we're familiar with, everyone's going to know we're talking about a Libertarian Party situation. There's just no way around it. We're talking, but we're not going to get into which party, which players, because it really doesn't matter. This is such an important topic that if we make it too specific to a current situation, it might not be as useful to people in the future. But obviously, we can't pretend like we're not talking about a Libertarian Party situation. I mean, so that made it, that made it relevant to Pink Flame of Liberty. But just so everyone knows, we're going to be staying away from names, whatever. We're just going to deal with facts. Principles. To keep people from getting into trouble potentially in the future.
How to do it right.
How to do it right. And I want to relate a story. And in this story, I will mention a specific party because I'm talking, actually there's two. There's one I'm going to bring up later, and it's Delaware. I don't mind talking about situations that are years ago. And I'm going to talk about one even before Delaware that has to do with Colorado, with people who aren't on the board now, aren't involved. So it's not going to stir up anything. So we're talking about notice.
I was around for that one.
You were around for that one, right?
I think so. I don't know what you're talking about yet.
It was during COVID. It was right after. Oh, yeah. It was right as Colorado was coming out of COVID. So I want to tell a little story. And we'll start off with this, because whether some people want to believe it or not, I believe in following the rules as I understand them. Now, obviously, my understanding of some things has changed over time, and people will think, oh, your understanding just changed because it's more convenient. No, you learn things. But if anyone thinks that I'm a stickler for notice only when it's something that pleases me or is convenient to me, this is where the story's going to go. We had a board in Colorado. It's not the current board. Totally different situation that neither Mike or I cared for very much. And in fact, the chair was purposely very cruel to Mike, I felt, in that one situation, which we're not going to talk about, but you might remember, where you deserve something and she blatantly just whatever. So it was a board we didn't care for. And most of the people we didn't care for were up for re-election. They had to postpone the convention due to COVID because we weren't allowed to have in-person meetings. Our bylaws didn't allow e-meetings. And we are finally allowed to have in-person gatherings. Joe Jorgensen was a guest speaker, so this was 2020. We were allowed to have gatherings. It was before the election, I believe, so it must have been like in October of 2020, somewhere around there. And it was at that it was at that antique car museum. So they gave notice for convention, and the only thing that was going to take place, I think, was officer elections. I don't think they were going to do any other business. Now, obviously, people could have brought up. I'm sorry?
We had to have those. And
yes.
I don't think, if I remember correctly, we had to do candidate nominations to a special convention, separate case earlier in the year, which was a whole different crazy mess.
Yeah, but this was for officer elections. And obviously, I wanted to see these people voted out, particularly the chair at that time, who wasn't going to rerun. So it wasn't even like there was a chance that this chair would no longer be in office. They weren't rerunning. But when they put out the notice, they blew it by 3 days. They missed the notice requirements by 3 days. It would have been entirely in my self-interest to keep my mouth shut, because we would have been rid of this chair in October or whenever it was. We'll just say it was October. However, notice requirements are sacrosanct. And I threw such a fit and argued back and forth with someone who unfortunately right now is deceased, because it was the vice chair who's now unfortunately passed away. That was the one really, really arguing with me. But they eventually did agree that this would just be a gathering, a fundraising gathering, and no official business would take place. So we were stuck with this board until 2021. So it was definitely not right. So it was definitely not in my self-interest, but I insisted upon proper notice. You can't set a precedent for blowing notice.
Right.
And it was only 3 days, but it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. 3 days. A lot can happen in 3 days, as we know.
And it doesn't matter. So,
and that's not just a veiled reference to recent events.
I don't even I've been so checked out of stuff that what?
Not going there right now.
Oh, okay. Veiled references will go over my head. So, why don't you tell us, Mike? I just want to do a general discussion on notice and what its purpose is, and before we get into the specific situation.
Okay, well, I haven't looked at things regarding notice in Roberts for a while because I've been focused on other things, and you're the expert on it far more than I am. So
yes,
feel free to correct anything I get wrong here. However, the general premise behind notice is that it is there to protect the rights of the members so that they're not blindsided by something with a meeting.
Right.
So they have a good advance warning as to what's coming so they can properly prepare.
And the reason notice is sacrosanct is because it protects the rights of absentees.
Right.
And things past have the risk of being void because it's not a valid meeting if you don't give proper notice. Now, sometimes that's not a problem. We'll state a current example that actually the JC dealt with. And since it's a settled decision, there should be no problem talking about it. And I know some people I'm going to be talking about Wisconsin. I know some people in Wisconsin are not going to agree with me, but their bylaws required, to me, way too long of a notice. But they required a 3-week notice, I think it was, for a board meeting. That is way too long, but you're allowed to have dumb bylaws. They realize it's not, but so they realize that's not a wise notice period for a board meeting. So they called a special meeting with 1 day's notice. And my position was that it wasn't a valid meeting. And I could see, Richard, we have a bit of a crowded screen because I've got a bad monitor. So I do see your comments, and you should see them too, Mike, on your screen.
I do.
Okay. So they called a meeting with 1 day notice, and I said that the meeting was not a valid meeting because they didn't give the 3 weeks notice. But it wasn't just that, because you're dealing with a small group of people. If everyone showed up anyway then it wouldn't have mattered that they didn't give proper notice. Because there's no absentees to protect if there are no absentees.
Exactly, yeah.
But one person was not present, and that made the meeting invalid. So that is why in boards, sometimes you can get away with not giving proper notice if everyone shows up anyway.
Yeah.
But the situation,
having everybody there means that your notice is basically waived because everybody's aware of it and they're there anyway.
Right.
So.
Yeah. But what we're talking about is something that's not in this particular situation, is something, and Richard, please feel free to jump in with anything important we might be forgetting about notice.
Please.
We're dealing with a convention. So now when you're dealing with a convention, everyone is not going to show up unless, again, I don't know, there could be some small state parties. I'm not trying to pick on any parties, but maybe Wyoming. I don't know where your membership, I don't know how they define their membership, but if it's like dues payers, if you have dues payers, like maybe they have 40, that's possible that everyone would show up, but probably not. Yeah. When you're dealing with any larger state, like even just say Colorado, and we're not talking about Colorado here, by the way. I'm just saying because I'm more familiar with it, where we have dues paying or whatever. It's probably like 300 to 400 qualified people that could be delegates. They're not all going to show up. So notice is very important in a larger state. And again, this is not about Colorado whatsoever. It's just what I'm more familiar with. So if your bylaws require notice for a convention, and like in that Colorado case from 2020, and you blow it, the convention's not valid, and you need to reset it like they did in Colorado. So what we're talking about today is a state party, obviously, because conventions are coming up, not mentioning which one, that an argument came up as to whether or not proper notice was given. Not going to say the exact time frame, because that could give away a state, but it was a fairly long notice requirement. In my opinion, too long, but I'm very prejudiced to the Colorado bylaws where it's 45 days notice. I think that's pretty reasonable, but that's also state law, isn't it, that it's a minimum of 45 days?
It's not in the minor party law for there, but there is a requirement that it has to be done no later than 75 or 83, I forget what it is now, days prior to the primary election in an election year.
Oh, you want to know what I think the notice is? I think it's in nonprofit corporation law in Colorado is the 45. But whatever, it's 45. Or is it 60? No, it's 45, right? Whatever. It's not as long as the one that in the present.
Sure, when we went through those a few years back to make sure the notice was right. So whatever's in there is correct. We'll check it.
Yeah, it's between 30 and 60. Let's put it that way. And I think that's reasonable notice requirements. But some states have longer notice requirements than that. So the issue in this particular case, and this particular state does have a judicial committee. So the issue in this particular state is the date was decided for the convention ahead of the long lead time for notice.
Right.
But notice wasn't the allegation was that notice wasn't properly given. Because the way notice was given, alleged notice was given, was minutes and I think a summary, but I'm not sure. At least minutes were posted to a board discussion group page, but nothing was ever posted with the title Notice of Convention, Call to Convention at the time.
The formalities were missing.
Exactly. And not only that, this was a board discussion list that you could subscribe to the way you used to be able to do with the LNC. Well, you still can with the LNC for votes. So like you can do with the LNC, but only a tiny fraction, I don't want to say tiny, a small fraction of the membership was in fact subscribed to this list. And there was never, anything on the website or anywhere else saying that this is where notices will be provided. All that the bylaws said is that notice will be provided. And the word provided was the word used. And
we have a state a couple of years ago that tried to claim that their maybe this was Delaware, I was thinking, I don't know, where they had a convention notice that was hidden in a Facebook comment somewhere.
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about Delaware because Delaware, it was Delaware. It wasn't a convention, but it was a notice issue. And we're going to talk about Delaware. Now, some people may be really, really surprised to hear me say this. People who know me really well will not be surprised to hear me say this. The rules serve us. We don't serve the rules. So to me, in my opinion, and again, maybe I'm a heretic, parsing out language in order to find a loophole is not what I would consider good faith dealing with the bylaws. Now, people can disagree. That's just my particular opinion. So when it says notice will be provided, to focus on the word provided rather than on the word notice, I think is misplaced. Because this is why I went back to the purpose of notice is to inform the people who are entitled to attend as voting members, right, that the event is occurring. So let's talk about Delaware, because that is really instructive. And I actually have it pulled up here on my screen. So with Delaware, it was and I might have some of the facts wrong because it was a while ago, but I'll have the general gist down. It was a notice of a bylaws amendment. And I forget how they passed them. I think the board was able to pass bylaws amendments. But it was notice of a bylaws amendment to happen at a board meeting. And it said in their bylaws that notice can be given on Facebook, which is ridiculous. But their bylaws specifically said that. And here we're talking about a small state again, probably.
No, it's insane.
Yep. So a post was made entitled "Bylaws Amendment?" ? So, like, already the problems have started, and this alleged proposed bylaws amendment that allowed certain members of the board to get rid of other members of the board was posted. And then right. And then the person who wanted to get rid of these other board members immediately posted on that same Facebook thread, "Let's do a meme dump." So it buried what was already a defective notice like 10 pages back.
Yeah. I remember that now specifically because they might have well just written the darn thing in invisible ink and posted it to a signpost somewhere in Wilmington and called it a notice.
Right. So, right. But it was on Facebook where it said it could be. So that gets into the purpose of notice. Let's pretend the notice wasn't even defective and wasn't entitled Bylaws Amendment, ? That it actually was entitled Notice of Bylaws Amendment. Would it still be valid notice when a board member then purposely buried it under 10 pages of a meme dump, and the 10 might be approximate, okay? It was multiple pages of a meme dump. No, it would not be valid because the purpose of notice is for people to see it. And Alicia...
that goes to a key point here. It's not just what's in the notice, but how it is given. Whether it's actively sent out to the members who are entitled to get it, or whether it's put out there passively for people to go find it and see it. Those factors matter as well, as much as what's in it.
Okay, so I'm going to read what
how was just as bad as the what.
I'm going to read part of Alicia's opinion because I thought it was brilliant. And we are going to mention names here because, again, this is years ago, okay? And it's a public opinion.
This is a JC opinion that's out there anyway on Opedia. So.
Right. It says, McVeigh asserts that notice of the October 1st proposed change was given by virtue of a vague, and when we're talking about just having it in the minutes, I think that's also vague, October 31st post on the Delaware Facebook group, a post that did not even at a minimum say it was intended to constitute notice. Same thing with merely posting minutes in a board group. It merely said, change bylaw for, ? Especially given that the Facebook group is used for broad general discussion, it is important to expressly say that it is notice so as to distinguish that post from one merely seeking feedback on a draft. This vague phrasing in such a mixed-use forum should not be considered as notice having been properly given. Same thing in a board discussion group where other things are discussed other than notice. It needs to be specific. If we were even going to consider that board group being valid notice, it would have had to have said notice of convention in the title. I still would have considered it valid, but if we were even going to remotely consider it valid, it would need to say that. So she goes on to say, when bylaws require notice, she just says require, and providing notice is requiring notice. It is understood that this precludes engaging in acts intended to thwart its receipt by members. Putting it on a group that only has a small fraction of membership. Right. That most people find board business kind of boring and very few people go and read those board lists. You and I are oddball exceptions. Normal people, we're not normal. Normal people don't do that. For example, I love her. Now here's Alicia at her best. For example, if the bylaws required a mailed notice, the bylaws wouldn't also have to say that hijacking the mail carrier's truck after placing the notices in the mailbox is prohibited. The bylaws don't have to say that a hypothetical white text on a white background isn't valid notice. Requiring that notice, I love that. Requiring that notice be given and inherently implies that one cannot take actions to intentionally prevent members from receiving the notice, and that is what undeniably happened in this case. So while I wouldn't attribute any kind of malice to this other case we're talking about, whether it was maliciously done, inadvertently done, negligently done, doesn't matter. It was thwarting members from seeing it when you're dealing with a larger party.
Her point was the method of the notice matters as much as the thing. The idea of white text and a white background and a 6-point font. Well, you're providing notice, but it's not readable. It's not determinable. So it's like there's no. How can I say it? It doesn't fulfill the necessity of what notice is. Right.
Notice means that the intended recipients reasonably can see it.
It has to be able to see it, what it says, and when it's provided. That's the third point.
Exactly. So in this case, there was an appeal to the Judicial Committee of that particular state who decided that notice wasn't properly given. I do think that is a correct opinion. The appellants in that case had a professional parliamentary opinion, which quoted Roberts on this, and had said when the bylaws merely say that notice is to be sent, that these are acceptable ways to do it. If the bylaws don't say otherwise, and these particular bylaws mentioned that when it deals with things that need to go out to the membership, that electronic mail is acceptable. And there was an extensive email list, as evidenced by the fact that a quote unquote notice of convention was sent by email, but after the notice deadline. So there was no technological problems. There was no reason that notice could not have been sent the night that vote took place, which would have been within the notice requirement. Again, no malice required. You're dealing with volunteers. I understand that it's a pain in the ass, but you got it. But you got to do it.
Yeah.
Now, the board, after the fact, and again, there are different opinions. Just because we disagree with opinion doesn't mean that we're denigrating anyone's abilities. We just disagree. The board got a parliamentary opinion after that focused on the word provided. And basically, in my opinion, did almost like a McVeigh type argument and said, as long as members theoretically could see it, notice was provided. And I just think that is very, very misplaced. Because if you want to take that argument to its logical conclusion, then
hire skywriters.
Exactly. You could have went to a public park that any member of this state party theoretically could have seen and just nailed it like Martin Luther's 95 Thesis to a tree.
Nail it in white font on white paper, a 6-point font on a piece of paper, and nail it to the freaking light post. Yeah, I mean, come on.
Yeah, you have to make a reasonable attempt that the people who are entitled to come will see it. I think this would have gotten a lot dicier if at least it had been posted on the state party's website.
Yeah.
I still don't think that would have been valid.
They would do it.
I still don't think that would have been valid, because when it says notice be provided to the membership and you have an email list in which you regularly already send out newsletters, that is, to me, the proper notice. Though I think the argument would have been much stronger on the board side if it was put on the website. But I still wouldn't have thought that was valid notice. But it potentially would have been a much stronger argument.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about the cough there.
That's so. Just wondering your thoughts on concentrating on the word provided rather than on the nature of notice, because the other parliamentarian basically took provided as equivalent to sent, and I agree. I agree with the parliamentarian for the appellants.
Provided and send are two sides of the same action. You send it out however you send it out, which is providing it to the people who are supposed to receive it.
Right. It's reasonably.
To me, they're equivalent.
Yeah. I think they're functionally equivalent.
Yeah, and from a past bylaws committee that I won't mention when and where, I remember discussing that very question, and we arrived at that conclusion ourselves. So
right,
which is why we never bothered to change that bylaw, because we felt the wording as it was sufficient.
So the lesson is that notice is something that you need to tread very carefully on and make sure. Now, similar to now we're talking about a JC decision already rendered. It was on an appeal I did that I didn't win, and that's okay. On the joint fundraising agreement, in which the bylaw of providing full support to the party's nominee came up, I was like, obviously that doesn't mean that everyone on the LNC needs to sell their house and donate that money to the campaign. But it also doesn't mean you do nothing. It's somewhere reasonably in the middle, or I don't even want to say in the middle, but it's somewhere in the land of reasonable. Yeah. And same thing with notice. If you send out an email and a couple of them bounce back because people changed their email address or they typed it in wrong on their membership form, you're not required to hire a private detective to go track them down and personally serve them with notice. You made a reasonable, good faith effort. And putting it on a business list that you already know only a fraction subscribe to, and you don't even know how many of those are qualified to go to that convention, because plenty of out-of-state people subscribe to these lists, or people that moved away, or reporters, because like with the
multiple residences,
yeah, because we know on the old LNC Business Discuss list that like Reason Magazine subscribed to it, and so on and so forth. So on that, I think we need to be focusing on the purpose of notice. So I've been talking a lot. If you want to block some,
there's 3 parts to it. There's 3 parts to it with the notice. One is, what are you saying? And you got to be very specific and detailed on it, so that there's no question as to what you're doing, what you're going to be doing. That's the first piece. The content of what the notice says has to be very precise. The second thing is, as we've just been talking about, is how it is sent out, how it is distributed, provided, given to the members who are eligible to attend whatever the meeting or convention may be. And the third part of it is when you send it out. And this is where different bylaws have different rules regarding what their notice period should be, whether it's 7 days out, 30 days, 60 days, whatever the heck it may be. But that also has to be kept in mind when doing this. And if you don't meet those 3 criteria of getting your story straight, getting your details right, that is, getting your distribution correct, or at least trying to, and then also getting it sent out on time. If you don't get those 3 things accomplished, then your meeting is basically DOA.
Right. And you don't want to risk that.
No, you don't, because it just it just throws everything out of whack, and it can cause more trouble than it needs to be in the first place if you just pay attention to the details and make sure you do it in the proper, timely manner.
And I'm just looking to see if there's any interesting language here. I know when I was communications director of Colorado, I would always be freaking out on notice. Yeah. I freaked out more even, I think, than was necessary.
Well, here's what 9.3 says about it, okay? In any organization, notice must be sent a reasonable time in advance of each regular meeting that is separated by more than a quarterly time interval from the previous regular meeting. Notice must also be sent a reasonable time in advance of a convention of delegates. In many organizations, a call is sent to all members in advance of each meeting. So that sums it up right there. I mean, when you're doing it, reasonable time is subject to whatever you feel like it may be. Usually from the old days prior to email, those periods were longer because a lot of those notices were sent out by the good old-fashioned snail mail, which took some time for it to get there, because post offices are, especially since after they overhauled them back in the early 80s and screwed up how they did their local sorting. But it takes time for that to happen, and a lot of the notice requirements that still exist in a lot of the bylaws, at least in the party, still reflect those older periods of time. And that's not a bad thing. That is not a bad thing at all, because snail mail is still a good alternative to email or a complement to it if you need to go that route. Even though it may be a little old school, there's still nothing wrong with it. Some old bylaws used to say fax was in there, for crying out loud.
Yeah. And
I mean,
there's
how obsolete can you get? But, there are still fax machines floating around out there. And there's still fax software to do it.
And I'll say here, I don't think this was cited in either opinion, but I would have cited 1.7, which says the call of a meeting, and a convention is a members meeting, is a written notice of its time and place that is sent to all members of the organization a reasonable time in advance. Now, in this circumstance, reasonable is determined by their bylaws, which gives a specific time. Ordinarily, it wouldn't be that long. However, since there was a dispute, it might be, I think it would be in the best interest of this particular state party to make that provision more specific. As I always said, bylaws tend to be, how do I put it, a historical record of institutional trauma. Because you tend to change them based upon controversies that took place. So they may
sure how we tick, because as they change in response to things that happen, whether they're somebody finding a loophole or something unexpected like COVID happening, and it makes you sit back and go, wait a second, we never really thought about this. We got to make sure this is adjusted. And notice requirements fall under that as well, just as easily as everything else.
Yes. And what I was freaking out in Colorado is I think our bylaws, if I remember correctly, everyone thinks I probably, because I'm like so into bylaws, know having them memorized. I actually have to look those up more than a lot of others. Because I look at so many that I forget. I think the Colorado bylaws actually use the phrase call to convention, because I remember freaking out when I was a communications director going, oh my God, that sounds so formal. It must have to have certain language. Now I realize that it just needed to be a notice, and it didn't have to be quite so like, all men hereby these presents.
That's actually very old bylaws that literally goes back to the early 2000s.
Oh, but I did really formal calls to convention. All members are hereby to present themselves at.
There's nothing wrong with the hear ye, okay?
I know I should have hired a town crier. Now that I think about how formal my calls to convention were.
Nothing wrong with that.
Oh my God. So I certainly, I mean, if I were a member of this organization, I would shorten the notice requirements, because I think that's way too long. Particularly if you screw it up, because now you got to wait to reset it that additional length of time. So I think it's way too long, but perhaps there's a reason for that, because now I'm going to get to the next thing, which is kind of moving beyond notice, and when it's talking about screwing with your bylaws. Because I say bylaws are basically the scar tissue of past institutional trauma, whenever you go to change a bylaw, you should always try to figure out as much as you can as to why it's there. Because you might be removing something that there's a very good reason for it to be there, because it caused a lot of trouble in the past. Or you may...
Bylaws committee's ears, please.
Yes. Or you may discover that the trauma that put that in there is no longer a possibility. Like maybe there was a weird state law that no longer exists. But to just willy-nilly change bylaws without trying to figure out why this weird-ass bylaw is in there, you are just asking for trouble. I'm sorry, you cut out?
The I don't like this excuse doesn't fly.
Right. And so many problems could be avoided if people would do that, particularly in mature organizations. So like with Colorado, for instance, I mean, you're dealing with a state party that was one of the first. So a 50-year-old organization. However, I think you would agree with me with Colorado, with our bylaws, at least half of them. I wouldn't go back. We're still a mature organization, but ever since the minor party law got passed, there was big changes. So I'd go back to that rather than back to the beginning.
Yeah, we had to conform to that, and right now, until somebody screws around with them, it does. That's why that index is in the back of the bylaws, to show where it conforms up, to send a message and give a back trail to say, hey, you need these pieces in here.
Yeah. And Wordsmith is asking which organization we're talking about. We're purposely not saying so because we're dealing with lessons and principles that everyone can apply, and don't want to make it specific to. We're obviously talking about a state libertarian party, and that's as far as specific as we're going to get, because all state parties will face that. We faced it in Colorado. Delaware faced it, even though it wasn't a convention. This stuff.
That's a matter, right?
This stuff happens. And you start getting into issues with you go, okay, well, you just reset it. Well, particularly if you're dealing with a larger state party, not a Wyoming or a Delaware, where a lot of arrangements need to be made, like a hotel block and renting a facility and getting speakers. It really can be a big deal to reset it. I know there was one state party, I'm not going to say which one, that would have its convention in a Denny's. Then it's not that big of a deal,
Right.
So those are all considerations to
even a mid-level state like Alabama, where I'm at now, they're already starting planning for our convention coming up in a couple of months. It's our 50th, and that makes it a special occasion. But we're also got to go through all those details of where we're booking it and all the logistics attached to it. And that does take time, and the larger the organization, the more logistics are involved. That is why the national convention planning so far out in advance takes so long. Plus, it gives them more time to screw things up, but that's another story. So as a result, it winds up working through it. It takes time. It's a logistical, I don't want to say nightmare, because I planned conventions in the past, but it's definitely complicated. And it takes a lot of organization, a lot of people working together, and a lot of sorting things out to make it happen. And if you screw up your notice on your call to convention, all that goes out the window, and you got to start over. And that is a fundamental nut. Just to go on Colorado's angle, for example, 2020 with COVID, we had a convention planned, and COVID happened, and it threw everything into the shit basket. It took multiple times trying to reschedule it, and it just kept falling apart on us because of the COVID stuff, until we finally were able to do something about it. And then we had a special convention for informal purposes, just for national convention delegates. We had to get that figured out. And then we had to have that other meeting later on, which was supposed to be could have been a convention to elect, but it really didn't meet the notice and the other requirements of the bylaws. So it wound up being a fundraising event instead. So it was all a case of circumstances worked against getting all that straight. And it just threw monkey wrench after monkey wrench into it. So you want to keep your notice right in order to not have that be a monkey wrench thrown in.
And another thing I wanted to bring up, and this has to do with, and this is very LP specific, and not talking about national at all right now. Talking about state parties, and we'll bring up an example that's already settled, and this is the Michigan situation. So there was a dispute in Michigan over whether proper notice was given, not of a convention, but of certain actions to be taken at a convention, and it got appealed to their JC. Multiple parliamentary opinions were written. And as parliamentarians do, there were different opinions, some on one side, some on the other, and it got appealed to their judicial committee. And their judicial committee ruled in a certain way. Now, again, we're not mentioning names, but the person, the parliamentarian that wrote the opinion for the appellants in this particular case wrote an opinion in the Michigan case as well, and was on the losing side. I don't really like calling it the side that didn't win the JC appeal. I don't like saying losing side. And once their JC, the non-prevailing side, once their JC ruled, I got to give props to this parliamentarian who, even though he wrote an opinion that was opposite to what their JC determined, said, your bylaws say the JC has the authority to make these decisions. It doesn't matter whether I agree with them or not. Now you need to follow your JC. That's what your bylaws say. And same thing in this particular, I'd say the same thing in this particular case, and to any state party that has a JC. I am a fan of JCs. I know some people aren't. And I obviously think, I don't agree with a JC opinion earlier this term, but I've never been anything, I've only been of the utmost respect for the JC, even when I disagree with them. I obviously did not agree with the 2021 JC, but but I wasn't disrespectful to them, and I am still a fan of JCs, even though I've won and lost probably about an equal amount. And I don't mean me personally. I helped write the Delaware appeal, which obviously we won. So I think having check.
I'm on two of them. I'm on two JCs right now, national and state, and I've argued one case before the JC, and that was back in 2008 nationally, and I won that one. So I'm in the same boat for a different reason. We need that check on the leadership bodies of the party to make sure they don't do stupid stuff.
And not only that, I know when you're on a board, it can be annoying to get appealed. I know that. I can imagine it can be annoying. However, if you don't have a JC, then you've left the only recourse. I have a feeling that some people on boards think if there's no JC, well, then it's woohoo, it's Gollum with the ring, my precious, we can do whatever we want. No, all you do is force members into turning to the courts, because boards are not supreme authorities. And not all the time, but a lot of the times the courts will give more deference when there's an internal dispute resolution process. Not always, though, because there was some JC decisions, if we go back to Michigan, where a court did overturn their JC because they said their JC decision wasn't reasonable. But at least it puts a barrier or another vent valve, as it were, before people turn immediately to the courts, because members always
resolution to help resolve the problem before it goes to that level.
Right. And you may not always agree. And here's what people don't understand. And, let's say there was a JC decision, like some members in Michigan thought, that was just not reasonable by any stretch of the imagination. And it seems like from the little bit I followed it, because I stopped following things after the trademark stuff, that the court agreed that the decision wasn't reasonable. I could be misunderstanding it. Here's what's interesting. If a board thinks a JC decision isn't reasonable, they can turn to the courts too. But it adds an additional layer, and courts will grant great deference. And another reason it adds an additional layer is there is a legal principle that might not apply in every case, but it's a general rule. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving legal advice. I'm just giving general legal principles, is that before you turn to the courts, you have to exhaust your internal remedies.
Yep.
Right.
I was going to say that myself, but you got me.
Yeah.
Me to it.
Yeah. There's a general legal doctrine. It's not true in every single case, but exhaustion of remedies.
And that's why a lot of organizations have our internal mediation, arbitration things put into play for resolving these things internally first.
Got schmutz on my shirt.
Protects the organization from further lawsuits, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah. So, all in all, the lesson is don't mess with notice. Now, I'm going to ask you, and now I'm just going to spring something on you, because I think I'm going to talk about the, well, I'm just going to spring it on you. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, and I'm wondering what Richard Brown's answer is. It turns out there is quite the division in parliamentarians on this issue. I want to hear your opinion. I have one. I'll tell you mine. In a roll call vote, okay, you're not talking about a convention. You're talking like a smaller board.
It's a regular roll call vote for women.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And obviously there's a vote, and let's say it's a 10-person board, and 7 people vote yes, and 3 people abstain.
Okay.
Is it proper? And we're going to move beyond proper, because that's quite specific. Is it not misleading? Is it accurate? Is it advisable to call that a unanimous vote?
Ooh. Interesting thought. I mean, technically, the vote is 7 in favor, none against, with 3 abstentions.
And abstaining means not to vote.
Right. So, by definition of what a unanimous vote is, yes, it is a unanimous vote, but the roll call part of it doesn't reflect it being truly unanimous, because you have 3 abstentions.
Right. Yeah, 3 people who chose not. Right. Right. And some parliamentarians say it's perfectly acceptable and non-misleading to call that a unanimous vote. I can tell you, and from what I understand, and Richard can correct me, Roberts doesn't speak to this. It kind of gives support. It kind of gives support to that position when you're dealing with unanimous consent, because unanimous consent doesn't really mean everyone's in favor of it. They've just decided not to oppose. Right.
Nobody objects,
I actually hate that phrase, and it used to be called general consent, and I think that's much more accurate.
Mm-hmm. And in the case of a non-roll call vote, a 703, like we just described, would be considered a unanimous vote if it wasn't a roll call, because there was no opposition.
Right.
But the roll call, that changes the calculus just a little bit, because the purpose of the roll call is to get specific members on record of what their vote is or is not, or in this case, abstaining. Richard just commented.
Yeah, and that's what I said. Technically, because those people. Okay, so we're starting to get into the 2, and I'm going to put Richard's comment up here, because if I can, up top here, it's not seeing very well because of all the loud graphics. He says that he thinks technically it's unanimous, but as a practical matter, it should not be called unanimous. RONR doesn't address this. Agreed. But I'll tell you why I go on the side of, I think it's misleading to call it unanimous. So when you're dealing with voting, there's 2 elements. There's present and there's voting.
Yep.
People who abstain are present, but they're not voting.
Yeah.
I think unanimous means everybody present voted yes.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, while you could make an argument that the voting part was unanimous. The present part certainly was not. And I wish Roberts would address this. And I will say, even in on the LNC, there's been votes, as you know, the chair should not vote unless it's to cause or break a tie, but you can't prohibit them from voting. But the chair shouldn't vote unless it's to cause or to break a tie. Well, we've had resolutions where the chair has said, I am going to vote so that to make this unanimous. So I think the custom, at least this term on the LNC, is that if there's an abstention, it cannot be properly called unanimous.
Yeah, because the way that we're laying it out here in 458 on through about unanimous consent.
Yeah.
Here we go. 460. Unanimous consent does not necessarily imply that every member present is in favor of the proposed action. If you only made the opposition feeling it is useless to oppose or discuss the matter, simply acquiesces.
Right. And I think the word unanimous... I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think the word unanimous is somewhat special. And I don't mean it in the unanimous consent part. But when you say a vote, a roll call vote was unanimous. I really do think that has to mean everybody present and voting. But again, RONR doesn't address it. This is more of a, we're straying into the land of subjective. But I certainly think it's misleading.
Sure.
Because what if you had a 10-person board, one person voted yes, and 9 abstained? And that one person who voted yes went around trumpeting how this was a unanimous vote. Don't you think the listeners would think it had a lot more than one vote? I do.
It also would make me wonder, why would the other 9 abstain?
Right. But I'm just, we're really, doing kind of outrageous examples to prove a point. But I think the word, when you're dealing with a roll call vote, unanimous needs to mean everybody present and voting. But it's an interesting controversy.
Yeah, they do talk about roll call votes in 45, about 45 onward. I'm looking through here real fast to see what it says on this. Positive, negatives, and present in a third column, which is the same thing as an abstention, right? Yeah, it says that in 4548. Change permitted.
Oh, interesting. So
there's a final number of those voting and number answering present to announce it. Okay.
Richard put something interesting, because I haven't done the research in other parliamentary authorities, and he says the AIP standard code defines unanimous vote as a vote in which all members present and voting. See, I'm glad. See, I never read this. I am glad that my thoughts are at least in line with another parliamentary authority. I think in order to call it unanimous, all members present and voting vote the same. I think that is the only non-misleading way to use that phrase.
Yeah, the roll call section doesn't mention unanimous at all, by the way.
No,
Roberts.
And I think Robert should, but I'm glad to see that the AIP standard code addresses it. Do you know if Demeter's or what's that one that's always the outlier when I'm doing Pink Parliamentarian? There's one that's an outlier. It's Cushing's. Is it Cushing's or Demeter's? There's one that I always go, and this one is out there. Because I have I have some of these older, works. I think it's Demeter's though, or is it Demeter? I don't know how to pronounce it.
Actually. Demeter was the Greek goddess. But what the comment there about the unanimous vote for AIP, all members present voting vote the same. So what that means is just use the 10-person board example again.
All 10 said yes, or all 10 said no.
10-0-0, yeah, or 0-10-0, yeah.
Right.
It wouldn't mean anything in the abstention column.
Okay,
I think that makes sense.
It's. And there's no chance of misleading people with that.
Yeah. And that's why I prefer to put the vote totals, if available, out there anyway, rather than gloss over it, you know?
Yeah. Well, I in my
nice
minutes, even on votes that I would agree are unanimous, I never put that down.
Yeah.
I think when you're doing a roll call vote, that the minutes should just say the totals, that saying the vote passed unanimously with a vote total of blah, blah, blah is editorializing.
Yeah.
And people can read the vote totals and see that nobody voted against and there were no abstentions or whatever, and that you don't need to editorialize to highlight it.
But someone else will look at that with abstention and say, but that wasn't unanimous.
Right. You know, the time for editorializing when you're dealing with the political party is if you're going to issue like a press release about a resolution and then go, and this passed literally unanimously of the National Committee.
Right.
Okay. Do we have anything else to cover? Because we're at the hour mark. And
had a question earlier.
Oh, let me scroll up, because I am like really upset about this screen, because I don't know whether it's my screen or potentially my computer. You know, if that port has gone bad. I'm going to try restarting. And let me see here. Oh, she says, this had to do with notice. Doesn't that have to be a bylaw or a special rule?
I think one of them.
Well, but a special rule can be suspended by the board, because it's the board that creates them. So and then it would revert to Roberts, which is just reasonable. So I would think it has. I mean, you can put it in your special rules.
Question here. Let me throw a knuckleball out. 214 specifically says rules of order relate to the orderly transaction of business. Okay, it says in meetings, not for meetings. I think that might be the differentiation there.
I think that's following
about how we get there, not what we're doing while we're there. Does that make sense? I hope. Hang on.
Well, maybe says it was specific to what we were. I remember seeing your question. What you were talking about at the time. What we were talking about at the time was number of days of notice, but there might have been like a little side thread that you picked up on that wasn't about that. But I think if you're going to have a certain number of days of notice, it should be in your bylaws.
I would agree with that, because that's something that's important enough that you don't want to have the ability for a board, whether it's an executive committee or whatever, mess with it and use it to screw around and screw over the membership.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's it. Are we good?
Well, I think we're good.
Okay. Stay on though. I want to talk to you after the show. Okay. So let me do the closing music, and we'll see you guys maybe next weekend. But I'm gonna make Mike come up with some topics, because I've come up with the last two topics.
That's going to be a challenge, because of what I'm in the middle of other stuff that that I don't want to talk about here. How to do that and avoid that.
Oh, okay. Richard says that it was from Robert's Rules for Dummies. So where did he get that from?
He says he's checking it here right now.
Yeah, but where did Alan Jennings get that from? Because Roberts does not say that. I would love it if Robert said that. You know, Alan, don't you, Richard? Because if so, I would love to chase this down. Like, this has become a topic that's really interesting to me now. And could be something interesting to write about. It's not of any particular importance. The vote is what the vote is, but just curious. Okay. Well, let us know, Robert, because I don't have the AI. Well, he's looking it up now, so let's just chat for a few minutes while he's looking it up, so we don't we don't forget about this. And if anyone else has any other questions, just throw them in chat.
And by the way, this is not beer. This is apple juice.
Richard says he does know Alan, so he'll be able to go find him and track him down and go, where did you get that from? But he's looking up at AIP right now. You know what I should do down here for our shows, and maybe even for the Pink Parliamentarian, is have... Wayne would kill me. You know, when I say this, Wayne's going to kill me. Is have like a bookcase on wheels down here that I have all my parliamentary shit that I can put as a background for that. Because that would make a lot more sense than... I mean, I like my Lady Liberty, but still. And then I wouldn't have to do that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you could see above here, above my webcam, here's what you would see: a Robert's 11th, a statue of Lady Justice, a statue of Lady Liberty, a statue of Thomas Jefferson, a lead crystal bald eagle, and then down here I have my 12th edition.
Yeah, I've crowding out my bookcase in the office with all of these like other works, canons. That's another one I have, because I like in Pink Parliamentarian referencing other works, but it'd be kind of cool to have them in the background here, because the green screen for some reason puts a yellow glow around me that I can't get rid of. D.L. Cummings is like the king of the green screen. He's got no stray. Okay, I'm going to make a D.L. Cummings joke. Here. Hopefully he doesn't listen to the show. That's because he's bald. That's why he can do that.
I don't know. Couldn't you just take a picture of the bookcase and then use it as a backdrop screen instead of the wall behind you?
But yeah, for Pink Parliamentarian, I have a bunch of books that's just a stock image, and I blur it a little. So, but I don't like using green screens because
this thing behind me is not an image; it's an actual tapestry.
Right?
Yeah,
it's an actual tapestry. But green screens in my hair do not work well. I have a feeling if I did it in post-production, it would be better, because I use the Ecamm one and it's whatever. Richard, we're gonna end up just leaving everyone hanging if you don't get back to us on the AIP. All right, I think we're going to. I can't. Crap. I pulled aside a paper of something we could talk about, and I forget what it is. It's upstairs right now. Crap. I got an idea on
one of them. It was kind of a forum topic that I brought up before the new year. Well, here we go.
Well, that is still ambiguous. It says all legal votes cast. To abstain is not to vote.
Yeah, so it's still up in the air.
So no, that takes a side. That's opposite to what I said. That would take the side that a 703 is unanimous. I don't agree. I think that's in a rule. I think that's misleading, but that's just me. I have found out that this apparently is it's a very divisive question amongst parliamentarians just dealing with Roberts. So.
Well, there's always those. I mean, I think I seem to uncover one about once a month and throw in the forum just to really confuse everybody. Which kind of leads to an idea for a topic, and that was one I brought up about a month ago on the forum, and that is committee of the whole, quasi-committee of the whole, postpone indefinitely, and straw polls, and how they all relate to each other, and why are straw polls not valid when there's ways to do them anyway.
Okay, we'll have to talk about it, because I'm not really too sure where you're going with that, but like, it'd be nice.
Go onto the forum and look up my post. You'll from about early December. You'll find it.
I was on there recently, but I haven't really. it's not my thing so much right now. But I did get to bring up Martha's Rules of Order. Apparently, Martha requires a straw poll before every vote.
Okay, Richard comments again.
Yeah, that's what I just said. Since an abstention.
Yeah. 7-3-0 for each abstention, technically in it. Yeah. So for a non-roll call, I would agree, but for a roll call, I would not.
Yeah. I think it's misleading. I mean, it's technically, that's, is that like, I'm trying to, well, technically, it's like, but actually, all right.
Yeah.
All right. So, we're going to do it the closing, hang out a minute, and we'll see you guys next week. We don't know the topic. Where's my closing? Do we have closing music? Did I lose I lost our closing music. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it. And
somewhere.
I accidentally deleted it. So hold on.
What?
Well, we're just going to close out because I'm going to have to reset that back up. Don't let me forget, because this new scene at the end here, these are questions. Yeah, I lost it. How the hell did I do that? All right. Well, bye. All right. Yeah. Bye.